Hello, my name is Marco. This video is again about creating custom WordPress blocks with Pinegrow. Pinegrow offers 4 different block types. This raises the question of when to use which block type. We can choose between the following block types. Regular block. These blocks work with React code and allow inline editing of the content. The disadvantage is that the structure is saved together with the content. If the structure changes, for example if a new CSS class or a visual element is added to the template, the block recovery must be performed. This applies to every single block instance. We will see exactly what this means later. Hybrid block. This is a combination of PHP and React. Hybrid blocks are relatively new in Pinegrow and solve the disadvantages of regular blocks. In the block editor, they behave like React blocks. Inline editing is possible. However, structure and content are still separated so that no block recovery is necessary if the structure changes. ACF Blocks requires an Advanced Custom Fields Pro license. Creating ACF blocks visually with Pinegrow is much easier than doing it manually with ACF alone. ACF fields are assigned to these ACF blocks. Then you can easily fill the block content. The advantage here is that you can access all ACF field types. As these are PHP-based blocks, the preview must always be reloaded via the server when content is entered. Therefore, inline editing is not available as with regular or hybrid blocks. Dynamic block. This block type is suitable for displaying dynamic data that is loaded from the server. In our example, we load the testimonials from a custom post type and display them. The block has no setting options, but that would also be feasible. Let's say to influence the sorting or the number of testimonials to be displayed. To understand the differences, let's build a testimonial block as a regular, hybrid and ACF block. As mentioned, we use the dynamic block to list testimonials from a custom post type. In the video description you will find a link to the GitHub repository for the Pinegrow project files. There is also a link to the official Pinegrow documentation and a link to automatic.css, the CSS framework that I use. To keep the video as clear as possible, I won't go into the details about the necessary HTML and CSS. If you are interested, have a look at the linked GitHub repository. Here's a preview of the different blocks. The regular, hybrid, ACF and dynamic blocks all look the same in the front end, of course. The difference is in the technical details, which fortunately Pinegrow takes care of. There are also differences in content maintenance and how much effort it takes to change the block templates across pages. Shall we get started? Let's first take a look at the WordPress installation. The following plugins are installed and relevant for this example: ACF Pro, ACSS, the Pinegrow WordPress plugin. We don't need this plugin, so get rid of it. I only installed FileStar to easily find the path to a CSS file. ACSS generates its CSS files into the Uploads directory. It doesn't matter much, but in this installation I have installed GeneratePress as a theme. Okay, so with FileStar I now copy the path to automatic.css to use it in Pinegrow. To do this I go to WP Content, Uploads, automatic.css and copy the path to the automatic.css file. Then I create the Pinegrow project. Simply an empty project with plain HTML. The project already has an index.html. I will create all the blocks in this one file. It only serves as my workspace. For better organization, I could also create a separate .html file for each block. This is worth doing for larger projects. Anyway, I'll add automatic CSS to the head so that I have the CSS classes and variables available in Pinegrow. Then I save the project for the first time. Pinegrow asks for a project name. Clicking on Activate takes me to the settings. Here I decide whether I want to create a WordPress theme or a plugin. I select Plugin, enter the name and make Other settings. Next I will create a section. This way I can see whether ACSS is loaded correctly, because the section gets the correct padding. If I want, I can turn the preview to see my work in the context of the website. For some reason I still have to give the div in the section 100% width. Okay, then I'll do that in the style.css that was created automatically. I only use it here in Pinegrow and will not export it with the block into the plugin. I'll switch off the preview again for now. Okay, now I have space to work. The CSS classes are not yet available in Pinegrow. Apparently Pinegrow has not yet scanned them. I update the list of CSS files in the Style panel, and automatic CSS is now also listed there. I log the file to protect it from changes. Now I have all the CSS classes from ACSS to choose from. The preparations are complete. I like to use the insert code function or plus on the keyboard to write HTML quickly. You don't have to write HTML syntax here, but can also use simple syntax, as you can see here. This makes working a little easier and faster. I am now building the complete testimonial card, including the CSS classes. Let's speed this up a bit. I insert dummy text. This makes it easier to change the content later and replace it with dynamic placeholders. Now I can drag and drop the code into the structure panel and drop it where I want it. That looks quite okay. Next I create a CSS file for the styling of the testimonial card. We will configure this file in the block configuration so that it is included in the exported code of the block. I have to add the new CSS file into index.html so that it is taken into account when working in the project. The testimonial card must now be defined as a Gutenberg block by using the Blok action. At least a unique ID must be defined here. A readable title is of course also useful. At this point I'm also registering a new category for my blocks to organize them in Gutenberg. Let's see if our block basically works. To do this, I export the plugin. At this moment, Pinegrow is creating the actual code for my WordPress plugin. From now on, Pinegrow will update the code with every export. The new plugin must now be activated. To do this, I leave Pinegrow and switch to the plugin list. Here you can see the block category and our new generated block. Okay, now I'll check the markup in the front end. As you can see, we have very clean HTML here. Exactly the markup that I created myself. Yeah, that looks okay. Back in Pinegrow, I open the CSS file that is intended for the block. It is still empty, of course. As this is not a CSS tutorial, I simply copy the prepared code into the project. You can take a closer look at the code in the GitHub repository. Now the card looks better. The SVGs for the stars are still missing. I'll quickly copy them in here too. I remove the placeholders. To edit the HTML code of the selected element, I only need to press C on the keyboard. Now I can easily make the change and close the window again with Escape. The number of stars is controlled via a data attribute. I now add the attribute to this element. If I change the value of the attribute, the number of stars displayed changes. Half stars are also possible. Showing and hiding stars works purely with CSS. The CSS file must be specified in the block configuration. Only then will the file be loaded when the block is used. Unfortunately, you have to type in the path manually in the plugin version of Pinegrow. To make the contents of the block editable in WordPress, I now assign additional block attribute actions to the template. Again, an ID and the title are required here. With the Use As option, I specify how the entered value should be used. For the rating, I select Attribute and enter data-rating, which is exactly the attribute that I used in the CSS to control the stars. In the Attribute options, I specify the control type. This defines which field type is seen in WordPress for this value. I can also set a default value here. I also define block attribute actions for the other text elements. Let's try it out and see if it works. I had already inserted the block on the page. Let's see how it looks now. Great! I can see the fields that I've added as block attributes in the side panel. Okay, I can easily change the rating. As this is a regular React block, the contents of the block change in real time without any delay. I can also make changes to the text directly inline. And everything looks great in the front end too. I will quickly add 3 more columns so that 3 testimonials fit next to each other. Let's quickly change the content a little. This is our regular testimonial block. It works very well. However, these static React blocks have a major disadvantage. Let me show you that now. Let's say we have used this block everywhere on the website and now we want to make a change to the design, or we want to display a company logo. What happens if I subsequently change the structure of the block template? As a test, I simply insert a paragraph with dummy text. Now let's see how our existing testimonials behave. Uh-oh, every single instance now shows an error. This block contains unexpected or invalid content. And there is a button to perform block recovery. Now I have to press this button for every single testimonial block on the entire website, save the page, and only then are the desired adjustments visible in the front end. Fortunately, the blocks are still displayed correctly in the front end, but without the template customization. Let's remove the dummy paragraph and export. Of course, I have the same problem again. This is the major disadvantage of regular static blocks. That's why hybrid blocks are so ingenious. They have all the advantages of regular React blocks, but without the disadvantage of the static template stored within the instance. So now let's create a hybrid block. I duplicate the section and block in Pinegrow. This way we can continue working with the markup and simply keep the regular block. Let me briefly change the background color. In the Properties panel, I'll enter a name. I'll also add a heading so that I can better distinguish the blocks and the canvas. Both are just for organization and have no effect on the exported code. Now I adjust the block action and change the ID and title of the block. Now comes the important step. As you can see, the block type is set to auto here, meaning that the global settings determine which block types are exported. In this project, regular JavaScript React is defined as the block type. But I can make a different choice for each block. Let's select hybrid for this block. That's all. The other block attributes can remain as they are. Their IDs do not need to change either because they are automatically namespaced under the block ID. Let's try out the hybrid block. As you can see, I can change the content inline. The block behaves exactly like the React block. This is because React is also used here in the editor to display the block. However, the template is no longer saved directly with the individual block instance. And the rendering in the front end is generated dynamically with PHP. This has the crucial advantage that we can subsequently change the structure of the block without having to perform a block recovery for individual instances. Let's test that. Again, I simply insert a new paragraph in the template. As you can see, the block is updated immediately, and the change is also immediately visible in the front end. No block recovery is necessary. This will save you a lot of headaches in larger projects when subsequent changes have to be made. Now let's take a look at the ACF block type. First, I create the fields that we need. I select Block as the condition for displaying the fields. However, as I have not yet created an ACF block, I cannot yet make the assignment. So let's create the ACF block for the testimonial. Again, I duplicate an existing section. The markup of the block remains the same. I have to adapt the block ID so that there is no collision with the existing block. I also change the name in the structure panel for organizational purposes. Next, I have to remove the block attribute actions because the data now comes from ACF. I use the display ACF field action for this. For field, I have to use exactly the same key that I have just defined in the ACF fields. For the rating, I set the data attribute again. The text field simply replace the content. For the avatar image, we find a useful hint in the ACF documentation on how to get the image and render the image tag including the source set attribute. As you can see, the WordPress core function wp_get_attachment_image is documented here. I think this is the best solution in this case. Pinegrow provides this function as an action, which is why I can add it very easily. We can retrieve the attachment ID using the ACF function get_field. However, I had forgotten to create the image field for avatar. I'll quickly fix that. Note that I select Image ID for Return Format. This is because the action that has just been inserted needs an ID to load the attachment. Since I forgot to export the plugin, I still can't select the testimonial block in the location rules. So back to Pinegrow again. We still have to set the block type to ACF anyway. And now again export the plugin. Okay, I can finally set the location rule. Time to test our brand new ACF block. The fields are initially empty because I have not set any default values. I can now fill in the fields in the block settings. Rating works. Thanks to the ACF field settings, the input is limited from 1 to 5. Now, when I fill in the fields, you notice a significant delay until the values are rendered in the block. This is because this is a PHP block and my input is first sent to the server and the ACF block has to be reloaded. In addition, I cannot edit the texts inline. Not a big problem, but a clear difference to the React-based blocks we had before. I can switch the form view using the pencil icon. This is an alternative to entering data in the right-hand panel and you have much more space. Let's test again for changes in the template structure. Again, I simply insert a paragraph. As with the hybrid block, the change is immediately available in the front end, and it's not necessary to perform a block recovery in the backend either. The previous blocks were intended for entering individual testimonials directly on the page. As an example of the dynamic block type, I would like to create a simple block that lists existing testimonials. To do this, I create a custom post type named Testimonial via ACF. I simply use the existing fields for the ACF block again with this custom post type. Then we create a dynamic block that displays the testimonial CPTs in the same design as before. I start with the CPT testimonial. Then I change the existing field group a little. First, give it a meaningful name. Then add the location rule so that the fields are available for the CPT just created. Back in Pinegrow, I duplicate an existing section again. We already saw that. Then adjust the block options and the block type. Since there will now be a query loop that outputs a list of testimonials, I add a wrapper around the testimonial card. Then I copy and paste the block action from the card into the wrapper. I now use the card itself to add the smart action Show Posts. I use custom query as the loop type because I want to determine which post type is queried. I do this by specifying the ID of the post type created earlier with ACF in post type. I don't have to configure anything else here for our case. Since I duplicated the ACF block earlier, I already have the correct actions here to load the field values. This means that a new block should already work. Since no testimonial posts exist yet, the block shows me a corresponding node. So let's quickly create a few testimonials. Hey, the dynamic block actually spits out the testimonials. But it doesn't look so nice yet. I can easily change that by adding 2 ACS utility classes to the wrapper. Now you have an overview of the different block types you can create with Pinegrow. The great thing is that you can easily combine them in your project. My favorite is the hybrid block. It's always the default setting in my projects. I avoid regular blocks due to the problem of block recovery. If you have any questions, just write a comment below. Have fun with your Pinegrow projects.